I never imagined the day I found out my husband was cheating would feel like the floor had dropped beneath me. My name is Emily Carter, I'm 34, and for the last decade, I thought I knew everything about the man I married. We met in college, fell in love quickly, and built what I believed was a stable life together, 2 kids, a cozy home, and shared dreams. But on that rainy Wednesday, everything changed. It started with a text message that I shouldn't have seen. My phone buzzed while I was in the kitchen, and I caught a snippet before he could grab it from me. Can't wait to see you tonight. Alone. My heart sank. I tried to rationalize, thinking maybe it was some harmless mistake. But intuition, that small persistent voice, told me otherwise. At first, I kept quiet. I didn't confront him. I watched, I listened, I observed. There were subtle signs I had brushed off before: late nights at work, sudden secrecy with his phone, and a defensiveness that never used to exist. Yet, he was still my husband, and I had built my life around this family. Could I really believe he was betraying us? I started small, digging for clues. Receipts, unexplained charges on our joint account, subtle changes in behavior. I cataloged them all. Every detail painted a picture I didn't want to admit: my husband was living a double life. But what hurt the most wasn't the act itself, it was the audacity. The betrayal. He had been taking money from our joint savings too, supposedly for bills, but never explaining where it went. My stomach churned every time I realized how much he had siphoned off while I was managing our home and career. Then came the first real confirmation. I installed a small tracking app on my shared computer, one that he never noticed. Within days, I saw the pattern: emails, secret meetings, hotel bookings, all in plain sight. And while I felt like my world was collapsing, a strange clarity emerged. If he thought he could manipulate our life, our money, and our family, then he had gravely underestimated me. This was the turning point. I decided I wasn't just going to stand by and watch my life unravel. I began to create a plan, not a hasty reaction, but a calculated, deliberate strategy to protect myself, my children, and my future. I quietly withdrew the remainder of our savings from accounts he thought he controlled, keeping each transfer meticulously documented. Every cent, every transaction, was accounted for. While outwardly, I acted like nothing had changed. I laughed at his jokes, I made dinner, I pretended to be the devoted wife he could deceive. Meanwhile, I built a dossier, a digital footprint of his lies, his deception, and his hidden life. I reached out anonymously to his affair partner, a woman I barely knew, and gathered information. Little by little, the puzzle pieces aligned, forming a full picture of the man I had married: charming, manipulative, and dangerously untruthful. There were nights I stayed awake, heart pounding, thinking about what would happen if I revealed everything. But I knew the time wasn't yet. I couldn't act on impulse. Revenge, if it was to be sweet, had to be perfect. I reminded myself constantly, this isn't just about exposing him, it's about reclaiming control over my life and securing justice for the betrayal I had endured. And so, I waited. I observed. I meticulously planned each step, ensuring no one suspected my quiet, unassuming transformation from a betrayed wife into a woman poised to reclaim her power. The day I would act would not be a moment of rage, it would be a moment of calculated, undeniable truth. Little did he know, the woman he thought powerless was quietly turning the tables. And when the time came, it wouldn't just be our savings he would lose, it would be his reputation, his freedom, and everything he had believed was safely in his hands. After the initial shock, life had to go on, or at least I had to make it seem that way. My husband, Mark, continued his usual routine, completely unaware that I had already begun observing him closely. Every smile, every casual remark, every late-night text became a piece of the puzzle I was quietly assembling. I needed proof, undeniable proof, before I made any move. It started small. A suspicious charge here, an unexplained disappearance there. One evening, I noticed an odd pattern in his bank statements, frequent small withdrawals from our joint account that he labeled as business expenses. I questioned him casually, "Mark, I thought we agreed to discuss large purchases together?" He shrugged, giving me that practiced, nonchalant smile, but there was a hint of irritation in his eyes. That subtle tension told me more than any confession could. Then came the first major alarm. I received a package at our home addressed to him, but it wasn't from any company I recognized. Inside was an item clearly personal, far outside the realm of business. I confronted him, pretending ignorance, asking if he had ordered anything. He hesitated, then laughed nervously. "Oh, just something for work," he said. But the lie was thin, barely holding. My heart pounded, not with fear, but with determination. I was on to him. At this stage, I still didn't want confrontation. I kept up the facade of normalcy, preparing dinner, chatting about our kids' schedules, and maintaining the illusion of trust. But behind the scenes, I began to track his movements meticulously. I set up subtle reminders to check our shared email accounts, monitored his phone usage when he left it unattended, and even noted patterns in his conversations. Every small detail added layers to the story I was piecing together. What made it worse was his casual arrogance. Mark began showing small signs of entitlement, as if he could deceive me without consequence. One morning, he casually asked me for access to my personal bank accounts, claiming he needed to balance things. I smiled politely, agreeing in theory, but in reality, I kept my accounts completely separate, quietly watching him squirm when he realized he couldn't manipulate that part of my life. Then, the tension escalated. My supplier called with a story that set my pulse racing. Someone claiming to be Mark had cancelled multiple orders at the last minute, disrupting months of planning. I knew immediately it was a ploy to cover his tracks. At the same time, subtle rumors began surfacing from friends who noticed his odd behavior, and I realized he wasn't careful at all. He thought he could hide behind lies, but his arrogance was his undoing. I decided to expand my investigation. I contacted Mark's secret lover under the guise of curiosity and friendliness, gathering small but crucial details about their secret meetings and communication patterns. It was a delicate process. One wrong move and my cover would be blown. But with each new piece of information, I felt more in control. The anger I felt was tempered by strategy. I wasn't just a betrayed wife, I was becoming a silent architect of his downfall. Despite all of this, I kept a veneer of normalcy. I laughed at his jokes, discussed our children's schedules, and acted completely unaware of his deception. It was exhausting, but every time he dropped his guard, I added another piece to my growing dossier of evidence. Every secret transaction, every hidden meeting, every lie, everything was documented, time-stamped, and ready. By the end of the second month, I had an extensive trail. Bank statements, emails, receipts, and witness accounts formed a meticulous record of his betrayal. I could almost taste the satisfaction of justice, but I held back. I needed the perfect moment, one that would hit him where it hurt most, his finances, his pride, and his social standing. And as I watched him grow more careless, more arrogant, and more confident that I remained oblivious, I realized one undeniable truth: I had turned the tables without him ever suspecting. I wasn't just surviving, I was preparing a storm. And soon, the man who thought he could play me for a fool would realize just how deadly precise my revenge could be. The stage was set. All that remained was the right moment, and I knew it would come sooner than he expected. The day it all came crashing down started like any other, or at least I pretended it did. I woke early, made coffee, and prepared breakfast for the kids while Mark left for work with that usual confident smirk. But beneath my calm exterior, a storm was brewing. I had been waiting for this day, the day when all the threads of his deception would unravel, and I could finally see the truth laid bare. It began with an email notification I almost didn't want to open. One of the accounts I had been quietly monitoring had a message from an unknown source. At first, I thought it was spam, but when I glanced at the subject line, my heart skipped a beat. All funds transferred, confirmation. My pulse raced as I opened the message. Mark had been systematically draining our shared savings account, funneling thousands into accounts I hadn't known existed. Every plan, every dream we had built together, was being secretly stolen. I stood frozen for a moment, the weight of betrayal pressing down. Rage, disbelief, and grief collided in a chaotic storm inside me. But I didn't panic. I had been preparing for this exact moment. My hands, though shaking, moved deliberately. I printed every transaction, saved every email, and compiled screenshots of every suspicious message. Each piece of evidence was another brick in the wall that would ultimately corner him. While I was documenting the financial betrayal, another layer of shock unfolded. A friend of Mark's called me privately, hesitant but eager to warn me. She revealed that Mark had been secretly involved with another woman for months, something I had suspected, but now had confirmation. The details were gruesome, almost surreal: dinners at luxury restaurants, weekend getaways, late-night rendezvous, all paid for with our money. I felt a twist in my stomach, but instead of despair, a grim determination took hold. I couldn't let anger control me. I had to strategize. Every emotion I felt, from betrayal to heartbreak, became fuel for precision. I remembered all the lessons of patience and cunning I had learned over the past months. Acting impulsively would only let him slip through my fingers. I needed him to believe everything was normal while I carefully plotted my revenge. As the day progressed, the facade continued. I smiled, made casual conversation, and even laughed at his offhand jokes. He was oblivious, treating me as though nothing had changed. But behind the calm exterior, I was planning the next phase. I knew that a direct confrontation too soon would give him time to cover his tracks. No, I needed undeniable proof, gathered from every angle, before striking. By evening, I had a clearer picture. Bank records, credit card statements, hidden receipts, and messages formed a mosaic of his treachery. Even more astonishing, I found discrepancies in his tax filings. Mark had been hiding income from multiple sources, presumably to cover his secret life. The realization hit me like a hammer: not only was he a liar and a cheater, but he had also been committing fraud. This was more than personal betrayal, it was an opportunity for justice on multiple fronts. But just as the pieces aligned, a twist of uncertainty entered. Mark returned home earlier than expected, walking in with a casual grin, completely unaware that I had uncovered his entire scheme. My pulse quickened, but I forced a smile, greeting him warmly. "Hey, honey, how was work?" I asked innocently. He shrugged, oblivious. Every word, every gesture he made was a reminder that he thought he was untouchable. It was in that moment I realized something vital: I was no longer the victim. I had the upper hand. The months of careful observation, documentation, and patience had positioned me perfectly. He had left a trail of evidence so extensive that even if he tried to manipulate the story, nothing could save him. My mind raced, calculating every move, planning the ultimate exposure that would leave him powerless and humiliated. The emotional toll was intense. I felt grief for the life we had imagined, anger at the betrayal, but also a fierce satisfaction in knowing that the storm I had prepared was imminent. I pictured the moment when friends, family, and the public would see the truth, and I allowed myself a brief, private smile. Revenge, I realized, wasn't just about punishment, it was about reclaiming power, dignity, and control. As night fell, I sat quietly in our living room, reviewing every detail one last time. Each file, each screenshot, each recorded conversation was a piece of the narrative I would reveal. And then, almost imperceptibly, I felt a shift, a subtle sense of anticipation, the thrilling edge of inevitability. The man who had betrayed me thought he was safe, but the countdown to his reckoning had already begun. I knew the next phase would be decisive. The moment had to be orchestrated perfectly, public exposure combined with legal accountability. It would be swift, undeniable, and irreversible. The betrayal that had threatened to destroy me was about to become the vehicle for his downfall. And just before I went to bed, a single thought echoed in my mind, both chilling and exhilarating: he had underestimated me completely. The man who thought he could manipulate, cheat, and steal had never imagined the patience, precision, and resolve of the woman he betrayed. The next day, everything would change. The day had arrived. I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in months. Every detail, every piece of evidence, every strategy I had meticulously crafted over the past weeks was ready. Today, Mark would learn that deception has consequences, and that I was no longer the powerless wife he had underestimated. I started by organizing all the evidence into a comprehensive dossier. Bank statements, credit card receipts, emails, and text messages detailing his affair and financial misdeeds were neatly arranged. Then, I added the final layer: proof of his tax fraud. The discrepancies were undeniable. This wasn't just about exposing his affair, it was about holding him accountable legally and publicly. I had learned that sometimes, revenge isn't complete without justice. Once everything was prepared, I moved to the next phase: contacting his mistress. I knew she had no idea he was using her and our money to fund their secret life. I reached out, careful to keep my tone calm but assertive. "I think it's time we have a conversation about the truth," I wrote. Within hours, she responded, bewildered and curious. I explained what I had uncovered, showing her the undeniable evidence. The shock in her words told me she had been completely blindsided. I invited her to meet in a neutral location, a quiet cafe where we could speak without interruptions. When she arrived, I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I laid everything out: the financial manipulation, the secret accounts, the hidden transactions, and the tax evasion. Her expression shifted from disbelief to anger, and then to resolve. "He's been lying to both of us," she said. "We have to stop him." Together, we began plotting the next step. But I knew the ultimate blow would have to be public, irreversible, and humiliating. It wasn't enough for him to face our wrath privately. His reputation, his pride, and his sense of invincibility had to crumble. With her cooperation, I gained more insight into his routines, his communications, and the network of lies he had spun around himself. By evening, I returned home, pretending everything was normal. Mark arrived, expecting a quiet, uneventful night. Little did he know, the evidence I had collected was about to be unleashed. I invited him to dinner, keeping my demeanor calm and composed. As we ate, I casually mentioned that I had reviewed the accounts he had access to. He laughed dismissively, assuming I had no idea about his manipulations. That laughter would be the last time he underestimated me. After dinner, I told him I needed to discuss something important. I opened my laptop and projected the evidence on the screen. Every transaction, every secret message, every lie was laid bare. His face went pale. "Where did you get this?" he stammered, panic creeping into his voice. But I didn't answer. I let him see it for himself, the undeniable truth. Then, I executed the final, decisive act. I uploaded the entire dossier online, on social media, and in private groups where it would reach everyone he knew. Simultaneously, I contacted the IRS, providing all the proof of tax evasion. Within hours, notices were sent, accounts frozen, and an investigation officially opened. Mark's empire, the one he had built on lies and manipulation, began to crumble around him. His phone rang incessantly as friends, family, and colleagues discovered the truth. Calls turned to texts, and texts turned to messages flooding social media. His carefully crafted image of success and trustworthiness evaporated in an instant. The man who had once smirked at my supposed naivety was now cornered, humiliated, and powerless. Throughout it all, I remained calm. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The impact spoke for itself. He tried to explain, to justify, to plead, but no one was listening. The web of deceit he had woven had turned against him, and there was no escape. Even his mistress, once an unsuspecting pawn, now knew the truth and distanced herself completely. As the night wore on, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. Months of careful observation, strategic patience, and emotional control had led to this moment of undeniable victory. The betrayal that had once threatened to destroy me had become the instrument of his downfall. I felt a sense of relief, satisfaction, and empowerment unlike anything I had experienced before. By morning, the news of his financial ruin and public exposure had spread. He had lost access to his accounts, faced legal scrutiny, and seen his reputation shattered. Friends who once supported him now avoided him, wary of the chaos he had caused. And through it all, I had remained steady, collected, and entirely in control. In that silence, I realized the true power of resilience. Revenge had its place, but the real triumph was reclaiming my agency, my dignity, and my peace of mind. I had turned pain into strategy, betrayal into empowerment, and deceit into justice. The man who thought he could manipulate, cheat, and destroy had underestimated me completely, and it had cost him everything. As I closed my laptop, the weight of months of tension lifted. I had proven something to him, to myself, and to the world: no one should be underestimated, and no betrayal goes unpunished if one is patient and strategic. The sweet, undeniable satisfaction of seeing justice served was exhilarating, but even more so was the quiet knowledge that I had reclaimed control over my life. Mark's empire of lies had fallen. My dignity and strength had risen. And in that rise, I found freedom, empowerment, and the satisfaction of poetic justice. The aftermath of Mark's downfall was surreal. By the time morning came, the chaos of the previous night had settled into a new reality. His bank accounts were frozen, his financial empire crumbling under IRS scrutiny, and his reputation in tatters. Friends and colleagues, who had once revered him, now avoided him. Even distant acquaintances who had only known his polished image were aware of the scandal. The man who had thought himself untouchable was now a cautionary tale. For me, life began to feel lighter. The tension, anxiety, and fear that had gripped me for months gradually lifted. I had been a prisoner in my own home, constantly second-guessing every interaction, every word, every decision. Now, with the truth exposed and Mark facing consequences, I finally felt free. Sleep came easier, and I no longer woke up at odd hours worrying about what secret betrayal might emerge next. Peace was returning. Friends who had been skeptical at first began reaching out. They congratulated me, offered support, and, in some cases, confessed that they had suspected Mark all along but had lacked proof. I realized how isolating betrayal can be. Not only does it affect your personal life, but it can create a sense of doubt in your broader social network. By reclaiming control and acting strategically, I had not only protected myself but also uncovered truths others hadn't seen. Even Mark's mistress, who had initially been unaware of his manipulations, reached out one last time. Not to reconcile, but to acknowledge the situation and step away from any remaining chaos. That closure, even from someone I had once considered a rival, was strangely comforting. It emphasized that truth has a way of reaching everyone, and dishonesty leaves no room for trust to survive. I took time to reorganize my finances, ensuring that my future was secure and independent of anyone else. I set up new accounts, secured important documents, and educated myself on legal protections and financial safeguards. This experience had taught me the importance of vigilance, self-reliance, and proactive planning. No longer could I assume that trust alone was sufficient to protect my well-being. Emotionally, I began to rebuild as well. I allowed myself to feel anger when it surfaced, but I also embraced a sense of empowerment. I had turned what could have been a story of victimhood into one of strategy and triumph. I reflected on the moments that had led to this point, the first suspicions, the careful collection of evidence, the collaboration with his mistress, and the final exposure. Every choice, every risk I had taken had been deliberate, and the results were undeniable. I also realized the importance of self-respect and boundaries. For too long, I had tried to navigate Mark's deception by placating, forgiving, or ignoring small warning signs. That pattern had only allowed him to escalate his betrayal. By standing firm and taking deliberate action, I had reclaimed authority over my own life. This was a lesson that extended beyond finances and relationships. It was about asserting personal power and refusing to be manipulated. Over time, I found myself reconnecting with hobbies, friends, and passions I had neglected. The fear that had once limited my social interactions and decision-making began to dissipate. I traveled, started new projects, and even considered future relationships with a clearer understanding of boundaries, honesty, and mutual respect. Life felt expansive, full of potential rather than constrained by fear and betrayal. Looking back, I understood that the real victory wasn't just Mark's downfall, it was my transformation. I had moved from a state of fear and uncertainty to one of confidence, clarity, and strategic thinking. The betrayal that had seemed like the end of the world had become a catalyst for personal growth. I had not only survived the storm, I had emerged stronger, wiser, and more empowered. The lessons were clear: vigilance is essential, self-reliance is non-negotiable, and truth will always surface. Betrayal can be devastating, but it can also be a teacher, if approached with patience, intelligence, and courage. Most importantly, I learned that empowerment often comes from action, the deliberate, calculated steps taken to reclaim control when someone else tries to take it from you. As I closed this chapter, I felt a sense of completion. Mark would have to live with the consequences of his choices, and I would continue forward, free from the chains of his deception. I had exposed his lies, protected my finances, and demonstrated that no betrayal could overpower determination and strategy. To anyone watching this story unfold, know that it's possible to reclaim your life, even when someone you love has tried to manipulate or deceive you. Trust your instincts, gather your evidence, and act decisively. Empowerment is not passive, it is earned through vigilance, patience, and strategic action. And if Mark ever comes across this story, I hope he remembers this: betrayal has consequences, and no lie lasts forever. For now, I am focusing on what truly matters: freedom, clarity, and a life built on my terms. The nightmare is over, and the lessons are invaluable. I've learned to trust myself above all else, to protect what I've earned, and to never allow anyone to underestimate my strength. And for everyone watching, take care of yourself, protect your finances, and never ignore the warning signs of deception. Stand firm, act wisely, and reclaim your power.